Hey dear viewer, this is Almighty Z, and after leaving the theater with some friends, we had quite a detour. A crazed one-eyed homeless man attacked us, and we escaped after poking out his one good eye. But turns out the guy's related to the boss of our local mafia, so our car got destroyed in a car bomb. Broke and scared, we encountered many challenges. Violent storms, health gurus with medicine that transformed you, strippers, and cannibalistic giants that might have been a local basketball team. Yet we kept persevering to return home to our totally real girlfriends. Because no matter the danger, home and those in it is always worth fighting for. Now, none of that was true, yet that was more entertaining and faithful to the Odyssey than what I saw from Christopher Nolan. Hey! But how can you possibly say that with all the praise it's getting? Well, let's look at the movie itself and the story it contains, shall we? Homer's Odyssey is a fantasy epic set within ancient Greece. But several creative choices revealed in interviews that are in the film made it clear that Nolan wanted to tell this story through a grounded and modern frame with odd caveats, such as the film not having an orchestra because those didn't exist in ancient Greece, even though orchestra itself is a Greek word, yet you have the dialogue in modern American slang and accents, instead of using King's English or even attempt to have our characters speak in Greek or with an accent. Let's go! Or the armor for our factions is both anachronistic and looks rather bizarre, especially the Trojans that seems crafted by a broken 3D printer. Or the all-star cast where not one member is Greek, and some don't look like they'd fit into ancient Greek societies, to put it lightly. Or the beauty of the Mediterranean being restrained to bring a grounded Dark Knight trilogy aesthetic and not feel transported to another world. Even when the mythical creatures do appear and have a neat aesthetic, they don't feel mystifying. But this hodgepodge of creative choices constantly clash and make it difficult to get immersed in a story set in ancient Greece. And regarding the story, it goes out of its way to downplay or ignore many fantasy elements for the sake of grounded realism. For starters, the poem involves several gods that either aid or deter Odysseus throughout. Yet Athena is the only god that appears in this film, and her role is less about aiding Odysseus and more about reminding him of his mistakes through "He's just standing there, menacingly!" And many of the themes, characterizations, and plot points in Nolan's Odyssey are fundamentally different to Homer's, which was done for the more modern interpretation of the story's events that does not compute because of the story it's adapting, especially regarding the motivation and characterization of Odysseus himself, which I'll explain thoroughly in spoilers. This film is bad as an adaptation of one of the oldest stories from Western civilization, which is frustrating when several other shows or films have done Odyssey homages or allegories better, including shows for small children like Arthur. But it's also a bad film without knowledge of the source material, because the creative choices fall apart on scrutiny and make this a disappointing film to sit through. And this is coming from someone who likes a lot of Nolan's work. I think The Prestige, Dark Knight, and Inception are some of the greatest films to have come out this century. And even with Nolan films that miss the mark, there are aspects of his story I can appreciate. But I don't think Nolan's storytelling is cut for fantasy epics. Now let me be your muse as I sing about this epic.
You have been warned.
We begin with Travis Scott the Bard regaling a room of men about Odysseus and how he fucked Troy's shit up. We then cut to the Trojans killing Sinon and hear that, no cap, the horse on the beach is a peace offering from the fleeing Greeks. Then we cut back to Queen Penelope telling the Bard to stop laying the diss track about her husband. And the men, who are all suitors trying to tap that, agree.
Bard, why are you talking like that?
Sorry, I wanted to match the dialogue's tone, but I too could feel the brain cells dying around me. So I'll stop. Penelope's son, Telemachus, questions why she hasn't kicked these suitors out for abusing their hospitality for all these years. She replies it would violate Zeus's law, she's already lost a husband, and doesn't want to lose her son. Telemachus replies Odysseus is coming home, but she replies it's been 20 years since he left and 8 since Troy fell. But if this has been going on for years, and Odysseus has been gone this long, why are you telling him this again? Oh, it's for us, the audience. Swell. And it's not the only time the dialogue gives blunt exposition to move the story along, or give character motivations and not be subtle. Then we flash back to Telemachus training with Mentor and learning about his father from Odysseus' servant and friend, Eumaeus. He believes his father is alive, and tells him about when Odysseus chose a young pup to be his hunting dog, who's still around. Back to the feast, Antinous, the biggest suitor, taunts Telemachus about his father, and mentions he tried to volunteer for Troy years ago, but was denied. And this is how the timeline of the film is told for the first 10-ish minutes, which makes it jarring to get a grasp on the story. But it gets better when we see Odysseus himself, gathering driftwood on a beach with a gorgeous middle-aged woman nearby. No, it's not Stifler's mom, it's Calypso, although Theron's getting close. He munches on a flower, and she asks him what he remembers. And now we're transported to the beaches of Troy after the war. Odysseus tells his men they've been on this beach for 10 fucking years, but now they're going home. They see Agamemnon sail in one direction with his ships along established routes. But instead of following him to get needed supplies, Odysseus has his men sail in another direction and basically say they'll wing it. And this choice is what sets off all the events for Odysseus returning home. A brash and irrational decision from our hero.
But there's a deeper reason for him making this choice.
Yes, I know, and I'll address it, but it doesn't bode well for Odysseus. At first, things are fine. They come across a village and sack it for its resources. But when they're told that further along their route they'll find things they won't like, Odysseus goes,
"Nah, it'll be fine."
When they land on another island and explore, Odysseus spots a lone sheep and leads his men to follow it to find the herd. Well, the sheep leads them to a creepy cave, and Odysseus keeps going. Inside the cave, they find a lit fire and sacks of cheese, and Odysseus wants to take some of the supplies and meet the owner thinking they'll obey Zeus's law, despite his men thinking it's a bad idea. And they're right, because a giant Cyclops returns with his sheep and traps and eats 2 of them. So, the entire reason why they're trapped is because Odysseus made an impulsive decision, ignoring all warnings, and it cost the lives of his men. Not really making me like you, Odysseus. The Cyclops doesn't talk to him, and instead acts like a large, ugly beast acting on instinct. The next morning, the cave opens for its sheep, and while a few men rush to get out, 2 get caught and eaten, so Odysseus and company stop. That night, they decide to use a large stick hot from the fire to poke the Cyclops' eye. It screams in pain, then brokenly prays to Poseidon. Or that's how the men interpret it later, because the Cyclops never talks directly to them, and it speaks in guttural English.
Beast was the son of Poseidon. When we put its eye out, we heard it crying his name.
Also, it's the only involvement Poseidon really has in this story, and it's just to justify any storms that come. Odysseus and his men discuss their escape plans in front of the Cyclops, which doesn't make sense if it can talk, and said plan is to crawl out with the sheep in the morning to avoid the Cyclops' grasp. And it works!
And there was much rejoicing.
But then Odysseus turns around and fires an arrow at the Cyclops, which chases everyone to their boats and kills more men in the process.
You what?
And this entire sequence is a red flag for how the remaining visits on the journey will go. It recontextualizes Homer's story beats, it harms Odysseus as a character, how this treats the mythical aspects of the story, and how it sets the expectations for nearly every obstacle Odysseus encounters. For starters, the Cyclops' name is Polyphemus, but the movie never even gets to its name. The only way you would know its name is if you've read the Odyssey, or are familiar enough with Greek mythology. Because the creature is treated more like a force of nature, he never converses with Odysseus and his men properly. In the poem, the conversations revealed that Polyphemus was sadistic and took great pleasure in eating Odysseus' men. So our hero came up with the plan to poke out his eye, escape, and assure they wouldn't get caught by calling himself Nobody. So when Polyphemus cried out to other Cyclops and Poseidon that nobody heard him, they couldn't do anything. And the plan worked until Odysseus became proud and exclaimed his identity to Polyphemus while sailing away, which prompted Poseidon's wrath. And yes, Nolan, this trick does translate into modern day. Otherwise, how do we know it, and how could other Odyssey-based stories include it? What you've done is hinder Odysseus' cleverness, removed his prideful nature that caused the events of Homer's Odyssey, and made him a more selfish and brash character. Again, Odysseus is the reason why they got trapped in the cave. In Homer's version, it was the men who wanted the cheese and goodies. It takes more time to escape Polyphemus, and then once his men are in the clear, he fires an arrow at Polyphemus to set him off, and they almost didn't escape. He reasons later he did it for revenge for the fallen, but this adds to his lack of rational thinking. If you're the leader of your countrymen trying to return home, you want to make the best decisions possible for the sake of your crew. Doing so makes you a great leader.
That's good.
Not doing this makes you incompetent and weak.
That's bad.
But there's a deeper reason for him making this choice.
Yes, and I'll get there. We cut back to Telemachus, who decides to travel in secret to the king of Sparta, Milanus, to get more information about Odysseus.
Perhaps you've heard of Helen. Face. I launched 1,000 ships. Maybe now just 500. So many left on the battlefields of Troy for that face.
For your brother's ambition.
Such great dialogue and not eclair poisoning at all. But he's given more exposition about the Trojan War, where we see more about the Trojan horse infiltration. Said horse was half buried in the beach, and how Odysseus didn't tell some soldiers like Sinon to make the plan believable. But if it was supposed to be a gift, wouldn't you want the horse closer to land so it couldn't be washed away? Some of the men inside drowned when a tide came in. Could have been more useful for the plan if they couldn't drown, but the Trojans pull it inside, Odysseus and company get out at night, open the gates, and win the war, even if the act violated Zeus's law.
Rigby, what is he talking about?
I'll explain this in a bit, because this concept is the crux of the film. Back to Odysseus. His crew land on another island and see a tall creature in armor. They try asking if it's alright and see it's a large child. It screams, then an army of giants emerge and start killing everyone. The men are unable to defend themselves, so they're forced to flee, but Odysseus is now down to one ship of men. This was supposed to be the island of Laestrygonians, but the film never tells us who they are, nor delves into their society, or even have a child lead many of the men into a trap where the giants eat them and then throw rocks to sink their ships like in the poem. It's just a straightforward slaughter that's only amusing if you don't think about the details of the situation. At the next island, Odysseus' right-hand man, Eurylochus, leads a small mutiny to have the crew venture to a nearby stone hut without Odysseus, because of all the bad decisions he's made. But it's coming off the giant island, which wasn't Odysseus' fault. They emerged from the ether and attacked. If Odysseus ordered his men to fight to the last breath, then the mutiny would have more weight. But the men stumble into a hut with wild animals and a middle-aged woman inside. She reveals her name is Circe, and she agrees to feed them. They begin to gorge on the food, but then seem entrapped to keep eating. They squeal in horror. Circe says she's revealing the true nature of men who kill and consume across the world and slowly begins to morph them into pigs. And hey, this sequence was quite cool. It's executed like a horror movie that fits the film's tone, and it's a neat way to handle the transformation. Meanwhile, Odysseus is hunting, and after killing a deer that morphs into a man, he realizes something's up. He goes to the hut, questions Circe, and notices his men are missing. Then notices Eurylochus' ring is on the table, and confronts Circe. He gets her to admit she changed his men into pigs, and her sister into a crow, but says they were going to attack her first because they're soldiers who destroy everything. And Odysseus kind of agrees with her. So the resourcefulness Odysseus has shown is now undercut by his weak attitude towards his men. They were just hungry and seeking help, which can be anyone and doesn't reveal a deep evil nature about men. Circe made a huge jump in logic that they would be hostile, which violates a certain law which I'll get to. And if Circe turns her own family into animals, she's clearly evil with some screws loose. Why are you agreeing with the crazy woman's worldview? And shocker, the poem handled this island better. Circe was a beautiful, divine sorceress who turned the men into pigs out of impulse, not fear. Odysseus got help from Hermes to resist her potions because many gods were trying to help. Stunned by being defeated, Circe became an ally and wants to sleep with Odysseus because he was a total Chad. But now we have a half-begrudging relationship where Circe tells Odysseus to sail to the underworld and talk to Tiresias, who will reveal how to get home. Once they're there, they call upon the dead and they rise from the black sand. And hey, that visual was kinda cool. They talk to Tiresias, Agamemnon, and Sinon. Sinon accuses Odysseus of lying about the plan, and Antinous got Sinon to take his place in the war.
Oh my god!
FYI, Sinon was never in Homer's Odyssey. Instead, Odysseus talked to several fallen soldiers from Troy, the biggest being Achilles, to learn lessons from their deaths he could apply in his life, not feel ashamed from the war. He learns from Agamemnon about his betrayal when he returned home, and gets advice to return in disguise to Ithaca. And Tiresias doesn't want to tell Odysseus the prophecy with his men nearby. So they're sent away, and he tells Odysseus that he must sail through the Sirens, then go through Charybdis and Scylla, and let Scylla eat some of his men. But they will all die except for Odysseus after they eat Apollo's sacred cattle, which is also a change from Homer. The cattle part of the prophecy wasn't certain death, it was a test if they can control themselves, they may make it. When his men are shooed off, this already creates suspicion among the crew towards Odysseus. Their relationship is still shaky, and Odysseus won't tell him everything. So resentment continues to build, and they journey home begrudgingly. Another missed opportunity in this film is the lack of fleshing out any of the crew's character. There's never any camaraderie among the crew, nor unique personalities, and it would have given their eventual deaths more meaning. But they sail past the Sirens, Scylla takes his men, and in turn they get mad that Odysseus knew but didn't tell them. To try appeasing them, Odysseus tells them about the island with Apollo's cattle, and the men agree to not eat them. But they eventually do, and their logic is we'd rather die by the hands of the gods than starve to death. Which happens once they leave and their ship is capsized by a storm. And yes, the dour events that keep occurring like a checklist is getting rather old. So Odysseus has been working through this on Calypso's island as the sole survivor. Then he learns she kept him there for 7 years hooked onto lotus flower to help ease his pain. Odysseus calls her out for keeping him drugged, but she replies she did it to heal him. It was necessary for his mind, he wasn't truly ready to go home for whatever reason, and the film agrees with her. Wait, Odysseus didn't really want to go home. So all those actions he took on the journey were just sabotage that got everyone killed.
But there's a deeper reason for—
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Yeah, fuck it. Let's talk about it now. Odysseus doesn't want to go home because of his trauma and guilt over the Trojan War. That all the bloodshed from Troy's destruction was caused by him, and he must atone. Which is why Athena periodically appears to glare at Odysseus and question all his decisions on the trek. And this is a fundamental change to Homer's Odyssey, when the entire point was he wanted to return home, he had faith his family would still care for him, Athena wanted to help however she could because she admired his wit and strength, and he wouldn't fall to the variety of obstacles in his path. As for what exactly he's guilty for, oh, that's coming up real soon. Now for the creative change itself, you sabotaging your crew destroys your character, Odysseus. Because even with this change in motivation, the film still needs me to want to root for you to overcome your guilt and handle coming home. But that vanishes when other people are harmed by your bad decisions. Kind of like in real life, when a returning soldier is dealing with trauma, once other friends, family, or trauma care workers become endangered or killed, the sympathy disappears. It doesn't matter how awful you feel if others suffer and die in your anguish. You're a husk of a king wanting to get high on Greek opioids that's not clever, charismatic, or heroic, but handy with a bow. That's not enough to latch onto. And because you're so different from the legendary hero who inspired people for millennia, I'm going to call you Otis for the rest of this review. Because you don't deserve to be called Odysseus. So Calypso helps send Otis off because she thinks he's ready even though she loves him. Which is also explained rapidly, and despite the many scenes of the two together, there's little shown or implied that she loved him. Through each moment of Otis working through his memories, she just stands by and gives more flowers, because it's for plot and not her character. And in Homer's poem, the gods forced Calypso to let go of Odysseus after Athena swayed Zeus to get him home. Calypso tried to make Odysseus forget Ithaca and be with her forever, and was enraged at the perceived injustice. But we don't like using the gods in our fantasy epic, so Otis is free because Calypso now feels like it.
Help me.
But through bullshit on the raft, Otis is back on Ithaca and poses as a beggar named Sinon. He reaches Eumaeus, who tells him Telemachus is currently in danger by assassins, from Antinous plotting to kill him. So Otis rushes off to the temple where the scheme is about to take place and saves Telemachus. He maintains his pseudo-identity, but says he knew Otis and he is still alive. The two head back to Ithaca, and after learning of the status of the palace, Otis helps devise a plan to rid the suitors without Telemachus getting exiled for breaking Zeus's law.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Don't worry, I'm so close to explaining this pseudo-intellectual law. But these moments of Otis with his son are at least nice, so I'll give props there. Telemachus tells Penelope Otis is dead and she must choose a suitor. She angrily replies it'd be easier if she was able to rule as queen, because she knows how to rule better than everyone, but can't because of her genitals. Which, speaking of other bad changes, what was the point of changing Penelope? Homer had her as a faithful and loyal wife to Odysseus because she loved him dearly, and was cunning by keeping the suitors stalling for time with the unraveling of the funeral shroud. Now, Penelope is a bitter woman who sorta loves her husband, but would rather rule because she thinks she's better, despite the servants still being loyal to Otis, and not her, and calls out her son for being too weak to rule, making her shrill and unlikable.
Why are you the way that you are?
At that night's banquet, Otis sees his dog one last time, and it recognizes him before it passes, which was a nice moment. As a beggar, he lets Antinous know about his betrayal of Sinon, which provokes the suitor, and Penelope tells him to stop. Then she announces a test for the suitors tomorrow. Once everyone is gone, beggar Otis talks to Penelope. He says he knew Otis from the war, and she asks how he survived when her Otis didn't. With intercut flashbacks from Troy and Athena starting to glare less, Otis replies it's because he saw things at Troy that changed everything. That the horse he left as a gift to win the war violated Zeus's law, and all that's sacred between people.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Or as the film beautifully phrased the last part,
Our age of bronze is collapsing. Maybe he couldn't bear to see the ruins of what he'd done.
now I can dissect this abomination of chicken scratch that people think is meaningful. Zeus's Law is an idea created for this film that is supposed to act like a golden rule. Treat every guest as you want to be treated, for there may be a god in disguise. The film thinks that the Trojan horse tactic is a violation of this law that is causing a domino effect on society collapsing.
Everybody got that?
First, the Trojan War in this film still begins after Helen is taken by the Trojans. Even if Menelaus says it was an excuse for Agamemnon to get better trade routes, taking someone's wife violates Zeus's law. So the Trojans ultimately made the first society-breaking violation, yet the film doesn't want you to think about this. It must ignore this to justify the Trojan horse itself as the first big violation, even though it was a clever battle tactic because they're in a war and not guests of Troy. And without the horse, the war would have continued, where Otis would have seen more bloodshed, never would have returned home, the suitors would have likely killed his son and forced Penelope to marry one of them, and his trauma would have gotten worse. Otis did the right thing by building the Trojan horse, and the film punishing for it is bullshit. And this moment is the source of Otis's guilt, leading to self-sabotaging his journey home, getting his countrymen killed, and getting high and sulking for 7 years.
Oh, you... Ugh. God. Choking on my own plate here.
Second, Zeus's Law isn't applied consistently throughout this film. This rule should be applicable to all, yet it only applies towards Otis's crew and against Ithaca royalty. The suitors can't be kicked out by the law, yet they've been there for years, they don't treat their host with respect, they abused the host's fucking dog, and almost killed the host's son. They're terrible guests and clearly aren't gods, so how does that not justify kicking them out and or killing them in self-defense? And when Otis's crew land on Laestrygonian Island and get immediately attacked, how does that not break Zeus's law? And why do the giants not face any consequences? Circe turns the men into pigs because she thought they'd break Zeus's law first, but that didn't happen. She violated the law by transforming him, yet she doesn't face any consequences. And Calypso keeps Otis drugged for 7 years on her island because she loved him and didn't want him to leave. But she gets off scot-free, and somehow this doesn't violate Zeus's law.
I can't take it anymore! I just want to die!
The film can't answer any of these questions, and it breaks its own stupid theme. Third, Homer's poem addresses an idea called xenia, an ancient Greek concept for hospitality. Treats strangers and guests with respect and hospitality, but said guests must reciprocate. If it was violated in Homer's story, the character would face consequences. Polyphemus lost his vision, Calypso was forced into isolation, and the Ithaca suitors would be slaughtered. So of course it had to be screwed up, and reinterpreted as a stupid golden rule idea, then forced into a warfare setting to replace our protagonist conflict of overcoming the odds to get home. Oh, and as for the...
Our age of bronze is collapsing.
How can you not laugh at the absurdity of that? What kind of people, especially in ancient Greece, would comment and know what age they live in and how it's ending? You did this unironically and thought it was meaningful.
I never thought it would come to this when I fought in the First World War.
Why you keep calling it that?
Oh, you see.
So the next day, Penelope lays out an arrow challenge for everyone to compete. If you can string Otis's bow and fire an arrow through 12 axes, you win me. No one can do it except for Beggar Otis, which reveals his identity, then he starts killing the suitors. The fight itself is rather laughable. Unlike in the poem where servants loyal to Odysseus assisted in killing the suitors, Otis here must embrace his inner Doomslayer to take him out. And Telemachus can only help him grab weapons, because killing the suitors still violates Zeus's law. And despite the choreography being rather pathetic, and many moments where he should have died, Otis kills them all.
And there was much rejoicing.
But wait, Otis, if part of your arc in this film is that warfare, trickery, and violence is bad, why are you doing it again to kill the suitors? Wasn't the whole point of your journey you shouldn't use brutality to achieve your goals?
This makes no sense!
But in the aftermath, Otis takes the blame for violating Zeus's law with the suitors, sails into exile to allow Telemachus to rule, even if he didn't learn much about being a king, and now Otis has atoned for his mistakes. Finn. There's a reason why Homer's Odyssey is not just a memorable and beloved tale for millennia, but one of the most important stories in Western civilization. Because it touches on one of the most core aspects of the human experience, coming home and fighting for it. featuring a hero who used his wits in combat to overcome physical, spiritual, and emotional obstacles to return home. From Cyclops to sorceresses to beautiful women offering immortality and another life, he persevered knowing his home still needed him and those in it remained loyal. So when Odysseus reclaimed his kingdom, it provided a thrilling and euphoric conclusion. And to twist this into a story about a man guilty for violating inconsistent trust, making selfish decisions to delay returning home, and having to atone for his mistakes is insulting. In a way, this is worse than what The Last Jedi did to Luke Skywalker, because Odysseus has been a hero in Western culture for thousands of years. But Odysseus made mistakes too in Homer's journey. Yes, and he paid the price for his hubris. But he responded by displaying great leadership to keep his crew disciplined and safe on the journey too, getting them out of horrible situations and trying to prevent their own demise for as long as he could. Every hero has flaws, but they work to overcome their issues, defeat entities trying to do harm, and achieve aspirational goals. That's what makes them heroic, and Odysseus was one of the first. So I say this from the deepest and warmest part of my heart, fuck you. Fuck you for subverting a foundational piece of Western storytelling that has inspired countless lives and provided a foundation for other good stories to follow. And with the amount of praise this movie's getting, odds are the average person will watch this instead of reading Homer, which disgusts me on a visceral level I didn't know existed. They'll think that this is what the Odyssey is about and embrace its rotten themes and lack of heroism without a second thought. And ultimately, it's what this movie is. An imitation crabs many won't notice because they've eaten the thematic lotus flower and have forgotten what made this tale special. Anywho, thank you all for watching. Expect more videos from me, Almighty Z, discussing more media from A to Z. So long.